Good morning, Jeff. Welcome to this discussion about the importance of effective commercial negotiation skills. Perhaps you'd like to start us off with your ideas about what negotiation is all about.
Yeah, well, good morning, Ray. It's thanks very much for inviting us here to have this conversation. Um, I think negotiation it's an interesting topic. I think at the end of the day, it is a process, and it's a process. I think when we're really, I suppose we've got something that somebody else wants, and they've got something that we want, and it's a case of sort of trying to understand how we can find a sort of outcome from the negotiation that's going to get us a mutual agreement. Um, and that process can go down a variety of different strands. Um, we can focus in on both of us coming out of the negotiation feeling that we've both won, or we can find ourselves in negotiations where, for example, one party wins and the other party loses. So there are different methodologies, different reasons, different values that the participants in the negotiation seek to position themselves towards. But hopefully, one would assume that both parties would want to come out of the negotiation feeling that they both gained what it was that they went into that negotiation to achieve.
It's
So,
interesting because research by World CC tends to say that although people talk about negotiation, it's often simply an imposition. I'm very big and powerful, you're not.
yeah,
So these are
yeah.
the terms, take it or leave it. But they call it a negotiation, but of course it isn't really a negotiation. It's an imposition of terms.
It is. It's almost like a forcing of wills from one party over the other by utilizing a variety of coercive views, opinions, abilities, size of an organization, for example, or just the power of the organization. So there's a variety of different stances that businesses can, and if they decide to, will will operate with. But I think it's about contemplating whether or not the negotiation is likely to be more short-termism in its outcome
Yeah.
or longer term. Because if it is likely to be the latter, then clearly there needs to be a different sort of approach that needs to be taken.
Well, yeah, but if you want a sustainable win-win, if you want a sustainable agreement, it has to be a degree of win-win because
That's the thing.
win-lose is not normally sustainable in the longer
No,
term.
no, absolutely not. And we see in many commercial agreements where an organization that has a degree of power, and that power may have arisen from a number of different scenarios. They may well have engulfed so many suppliers in the marketplace that there are limitations for the buyer to be able to select a variety of suppliers. So as a result of that, the buyer's left with a situation whereby the only player in town is organization A, and organization A can pretty much dictate the gameplay that takes place.
Yeah. And also, if you think about CrowdCheck, of course, if you think about bottleneck,
Yeah,
key parts, key services, patented products, etc., relatively low value, but
yeah,
high risk of
yeah,
non-availability. Again, the
yeah.
supplier is in a very strong position to impose their terms.
Yeah, absolutely is the case. And I think especially people involved in buying, and it doesn't matter whether or not, you are a professional buyer or for example, you're uh, a sort of a stakeholder within the organization, maybe in operations or in maintenance or whatever it may well be in the business. Every type of purchase has its own differences.
Mhm.
So, as you mentioned there, there's bottleneck type of purchases, and I think it's about identifying what we're buying, why we're buying it, and what are likely to be the ramifications of the ongoing negotiation going forward. Um, you know, I think a lot of people, Ray, don't often plan particularly well for their negotiations, and I think there needs to be a lot of preparation that needs to take place in advance to make sure that what we're doing is likely to enable us to get the best outcomes from this negotiation going
Absolutely.
forward.
I mean, I think preparation is the priority, isn't it? I mean, as we
Yeah,
say in legal cases, check that cases are won in chambers.
yeah,
The better prepared side normally prevails over the one who's unprepared.
yeah. It's like everything really. It's about trying to identify what it is that you want to achieve out of the negotiations. It might be a case of just setting out, what your priorities are likely to be, and then it's thinking to yourself, well, once I've got these priorities sort of mapped out, I need now to sort of think about the scope and the positioning of where we
Mm.
are as an organisation in relation to the other party.
And
But yeah,
yeah, and the other, of course, issue, often people think about negotiation purely about price, but one could be negotiating about delivery time, quality standards, variations, contract terms. I mean, it's a whole plethora of things that one could negotiate about rather than just simple price.
absolutely is the case. I remember sort of reading some material fairly recently from the World Commerce and Contracting Organization, talking about the variety of different negotiated terms there are. The things like liability, things like liquidated damages, things like intellectual property, termination, indemnities, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole range of things, and of course, getting into the nitty-gritty of the commercial arrangements will mean that the scope of work and the specification also comes up as part and parcel of a potential negotiation as well.
Sometimes the negotiations are internal between other stakeholders, not necessarily with an outside
Yeah,
organization. They may
yeah,
take place within the
yeah,
organization itself.
yeah, absolutely. And I think this is another major importance element because to get the best out of relationships, quite often you need to sort of begin to recognize the relationships that you have or need to have with the participants involved in those negotiations. Um, it doesn't matter what sort of, whether it's internal or external, people often have their own positions that they take in many negotiation scenarios. And I guess to a large degree, it's trying to sort of get underneath the skin really of the participants to just try and establish a little bit more about what really is the key interest for them
Mm.
and trying to match that interest with whatever it is that you've got as something up your sleeve that can bring about the opportunity for that negotiation to move into an area where we begin to think about the possibilities of working with each other and contemplating some of the alternatives that we could strive to bring onto the table. Trading, if you like, or bargaining, if you want to call it something.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're talking about ZOPA, aren't we? The zone of possible agreement. There's kind of what we call the
Yeah,
sweet spot between the two parties.
yeah, absolutely. It's finding that sweet spot, and it is important to know what your limitations are likely to be, but what your aspirations are likely to be as well. And I think if you've recognized what your sort of most desired situation is, then that's great. But you've also got to recognize as well, what's the least acceptable to you.
Yeah,
And once you've established those parameters, you certainly don't want to be sort of, you know, going off and agreeing deals below that
absolutely.
least acceptable position.
I think the benefit of a win-win approach. I mean, you and I do a lot of negotiating,
Yeah,
obviously, a lot of training, a lot of
yeah,
consulting. But obviously, in my experience, the a win-win can providing the preparation is there, the
yeah,
deal can be struck fairly quickly. Whereas win-lose can
yeah,
become very protracted.
yeah,
Yes, we will, no, we won't take it all. I mean, it
yeah,
can become a
yeah,
very arduous process. Whereas, in my
yeah,
experience, when you've got two partners who are willing to negotiate and are prepared to
yeah,
compromise
yeah,
for the mutual benefit, the outcome can be fairly swiftly decided.
yeah. I think you're absolutely correct in that. I think there's a bit of history here about people and how they think negotiations should go. Um, I think there's always a sort of individual perspective that somehow or other I need to win
Yeah,
at the expense of the other. and it's sort of like indoctrinated, I think,
Yes, yeah, I absolutely
into
agree.
people. And I see it on a regular basis,
Yeah.
and
Well, I see it when we run our weekend workshops. You know, when we have
yeah,
a
yeah,
company or client who wants to teach their guys to negotiate, and we split them into two teams and give them a
yeah,
fact sheet, and we spend the morning talking about how win-win works. And
yeah,
within 10 minutes of actually the role play, they're at each other's throats.
absolutely. And I could write several scripts that support that perspective, but and you just wonder why.
Yeah, I guess it's some. I mean, you know, I don't know whether it's a gender thing, but I don't think it is because I've seen
Yeah,
some female negotiators get extremely
yeah,
aggressive with the other
yes,
side. So
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it's an
yeah,
interesting uh, it's interesting whether it's because they see it as a game, as a role play
yeah,
rather than reality. Maybe I you know
yeah.
it's
I think also there's a bit of psychology here as well, because quite often people are under pressure to hit targets, and those targets quite often drive
mm,
the emotions and the way that people go about uh, dealing with their negotiations. Um, you know, there's been a lot said in more recent times about personality understanding
yeah, yeah,
in negotiations, and I would very much support that. I think that if we are going to go into a negotiation, we've got to think long and hard about if we're going to pick a team, for example, that we've got a team that complement each other
yeah,
and support each other and have worked out very much the approach that's going
absolutely.
to be taken.
And also,
So
I
I
think
think
it's very important to get internal stakeholder support. Otherwise, if you don't have their buy-in to the
yeah,
strategy, in my experience, your final supplier will go around the procurement team, around
yeah,
the negotiating team,
yeah,
and go straight to the end user, the internal
yeah,
engineering manager or whatever,
yeah,
who's got a different idea. So it's very important
yeah.
to get that consensus, I think.
Yes, it's
Before you even contact the other side, you have to know,
yeah.
get your own side in order first.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting. There's more and more emphasis these days on understanding who you're negotiating with, trying to sort of look at the strengths and weaknesses of the team or the business or the people, and depending again on the strategy that's going to be used, it's a case of recognizing that what you think might happen may not happen.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
you've always
yeah.
got to be on guard, for any eventuality.
Well, you need
And
the plan B. You need the BATNA,
always
best
got to have,
alternative to a negotiated agreement. You always need
yeah,
an exit from
yeah. There had
any
to be an exit somewhere along the way, and
yeah,
there have been occasions when people have just gotten up and walked out of a room and used that as a tactic,
yeah.
and
Highly
and
dangerous tactic.
it, it's a very dangerous tactic, but I've witnessed it, I've seen it happen,
Yeah.
and only for the organization that created that situation to arise um, recognize that they made a big mistake
Yeah.
themselves.
Right. You have to go back and say to the
And
supplier, sorry,
yeah,
or the buyer, go back.
yeah, and pull
Yeah.
them back.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Well, on that point, we'll close out. Thank you very much
yeah,
for for this discussion. Very
yeah,
interesting,
yeah,
lots of insights, and we will uh, just put up the next slide. Which basically says if anybody out there who's listened to this would like more information about negotiation courses and coaching that we run, then obviously you can go to our website at www.dpss.co.uk, or you can email the main office at info@dpss.co.uk, and someone will get back to you on if you need any further support or information.